Hello. Happy Wednesday. For those of you that took your exams, diploma exams last week, hopefully you've decompressed by now and gotten the shock off and shock and awe. Noelle will be joining me here shortly, and we're going to talk about the wines that were featured on the D4 sparkling exam as well as the D5 fortified exam. Noelle, let me get her going. And I apologize if you guys can hear any background noise. There's a store alarm. I live above several jewelry stores, and the alarms go off quite frequently, and it seems like it takes forever for them to shut off. So I assume the authorities will answer at some point, but I don't know.
Fun.
Yes.
Well, I am live from New York. I'm hoping that my hotel room's Wi-Fi signal is strong enough. So if not, you might have to take over. I think it's okay so far. Yeah, so to everybody who's joining us, Amber and I are just going to go over the D4 and the D5 wines, which have been released. So they're not, this is not a lock and key secret. And what we want to do is give our thoughts, maybe discuss some laterals, hopefully talk some of you students who took the exam off a ledge, if you're still on it, give you some comfort that even if the wine was X and you said it was Y, that hopefully you got enough points to still pass. I think there's a lot of focus on, oh, I didn't call that wine correctly. And yes, it's always great to nail that wine, but as we've kind of been saying over and over, and can probably never say enough, it's really not all about nailing the wine. It's about, did you describe it? Did your assessment make sense? Because there's a lot of marks that can be gained from quality, bottle aging, and just the descriptors. So that's what we are going to do. What we're not going to do is play Monday morning quarterback and say that any of these were easy, because that is very frustrating as a student to hear somebody else say, that was easy. I would have nailed that. So we respect you guys too much.
And they're lying. If they say that, they're lying.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. So, because in looking at these, I'm like, well, yeah, I might have gotten that one, but the other, I don't know if I would have gotten the other one. So it's always easier to assess the situation when you're not under exam conditions. So we're not going to say it's easy. So we're going to start with the sparkling, and really quickly, the three that were given was a Moscato d'Asti, a demi-sec champagne, and then a Prosecco Superiore. So before we dive into those specifics, Amber, what do you think of that lineup? I didn't tell you I was going to ask that, but I am very surprised at that order that they gave it. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, the big thing is you don't ever have to answer, or you don't ever have to taste the wines in the order given. And I think we're very natural, left to right, one through three, and want to do it in that order. Jim Gore of Global Wine Academy gave me this advice before my sparkling and fortified exams in particular, because this is where it really comes to play, is try to guess as much as you can before tasting what the sweetness is based on the nose, and then go dry to sweeter. And so with the Moscato Asti first, that's probably jumping out of the glass as something that's sweet. With that, even if it could fool you on the palate, the nose is saying sweet. So maybe you think, let's do that one a little later, while the other ones would, presumably smell a little drier.
Yeah, and give that pronounced intensity of the Moscato, I would probably have been like, ugh, that's going to blow my palate. I'm going to leave that to last. Again, playing Monday morning quarterback a little bit, but you can go out of order. That is very good advice. Take it. Especially if you get a Gewürztraminer or something, put that last.
And one thing I did for my exams, and I apologize, we didn't really focus much on D4, D5 before the exams came. We were kind of focused more on D3. But I went through and I did the nose for all three wines. And I did the same with sparkling fortified, the nose for them. Then I went and answered my theory questions and then came back to do the palate. Because even if something messed up my palate, it wasn't going to mess up my head and my nose. So I got good nose notes on all the wines before I even brought the palate into the equation.
Okay, that's smart. I think I was just more regimented and I went 1, 2, 3. That doesn't make it right. Okay, so we're going over the three really quickly: Moscato d'Asti, Demi-Sec Champagne, and then Prosecco Superiore. The Moscato d'Asti, you know, hopefully it was pronounced. Hopefully you picked up on some of that orangeness and the grapiness, and were at least able to get to either Moscato d'Asti or Asti. What other laterals would you maybe have considered, Amber? Like maybe a Prosecco
Yeah,
or
definitely Prosecco.
okay,
I
okay,
think especially if people get caught up too much in what they think the mousse is, the bubbles, because
yeah,
you got to keep in mind the conditions of the wine. The examiners, your APPs, the test folks do try to put them in the best condition possible, but life is life. Reality is reality.
it
And
is.
so the wines might not have the same type of effervescence. Now, truth be told, they have less effervescence. That's actually helpful. It's actually a really good idea when you're studying blind tasting for sparkling to decant them a little bit.
Yeah,
Let the bubbles go off so you get more of the notes,
yeah,
more of the flavor notes that come out. But it plays head games. If you're
sure,
expecting something particularly mouthfeel for champagne, for an Asti, a Frisante, for a Prosecco, that can really mess with your head.
yeah. And I think that's probably, yeah, if you were expecting it to be bubble, and Asti is semi-sparkling anyway. I mean, it's
Mhm.
got a lower effervescence anyway, but I think that probably threw off some people who were expecting a lot of mousse coming out. Obviously, it's sparkling. We expect
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So, yeah, personally, I think it was tough to start out with the sweetest wine. But like we said, you can change up your order. So going forward, if this was your first tasting exam, don't be afraid to switch up the order. If you're tasting this and you're like, ooh, this is going to throw off my palate for the rest, because personally that would be understandable. That starting with the sweetest would have really messed with your sweetness perception going forward. So Moscato d'Asti has shown up a number of times on past sparkling wine exams. One thing that we noticed that was kind of interesting was the examiners wrote that there's a common assumption that Moscato d'Asti is all inexpensive and therefore all just acceptable quality. And that's not always the case. And that's a easy assumption to make. But going forward, try not to make those generalized assumptions about certain styles of wine. Just because something has autolytic notes doesn't mean that it's necessarily outstanding or very good quality. You need to look at all the evidence, yet again, of what's in your glass. So, I mean, Moscato d'Asti, it's got like 130 grams per liter of RS. This was a sweet booger to start you out with. Yeah, any other thoughts to chime in before I go to the
Yeah,
next one?
no, I think it's a good call. I
Okay.
mean, Noelle and I spent some time going back and looking at past exam wines and
Mm-hmm.
examiners reports, and the quality range that they give you for Asti is actually, it varies. There's some good
Mm-hmm.
quality Astis that could pop up with that. I mean, this particular one I think was probably in the good range with that, but
Yeah.
definitely better than just acceptable.
Yeah. Again, is the sweetness
Yeah.
balanced with everything else, or was it cloying? Was it
Mm-hmm.
just like holy moly, this is cloying? So
Mm-hmm.
remember to blick it through.
And
So
it
then
may
we
have been
get,
even very good too. I mean, we didn't have these wines, so they could have
no.
been much more complex. But
And
yeah,
sometimes they give you you can get points for a range again.
yeah,
So let's say that you did say it was acceptable. If you gave enough evidence why you thought it was acceptable, the sweetness was cloying, or there wasn't enough complexity, the length was short, that's okay. Those are
mm-hmm.
good arguments for why a wine would only be acceptable. So we're not examiners and we don't know how they calculate their marks, but we do know they like well-reasoned arguments.
Yes.
So if you did that, you might be all right. The demi-sec champagne, so now we're moving from 130 grams per liter down to 38 grams per liter, which is still, pretty sweet in general. Mm-hmm. But if you went through in order, you may not have picked up on a lot of that sweetness, I'm guessing. So that would be challenging and a little bit frustrating. This is a popular wine to show up on exams. A lot of markets actually don't have a lot of demi-sec champagne, so I think it's
Mm-hmm.
challenging for people to find these wines in their studies. And this is another important reminder that it's not all going to be these popular non-vintage champagne. You might have some sweet stuff. I had a sparkling Shiraz, which is a little bit of an oddball. So anything's fair game. So the sparkling, let's see, the demi-sec. You hopefully got a little bit of autolytic character. This guy was aged traditional method for 3 years. If you had to talk about bottle aging, remember that sweet wines often are very age-worthy. And so just because this is a demi-sec sweet champagne, perhaps it could age well. But again, if you said this isn't suitable for aging as part of your argument, as long as you gave some notes and arguments and reasons why, you'll probably be okay. So for, what would you guess a lateral would be for this, Amber, if somebody zigged instead of zagged?
Well, I mean, I think you're very spot on that a lot of people probably don't taste demi-sec sparklers, and that's going to be the big thing. And so for the folks that are watching this that haven't yet taken a, sparkling wine blind tasting exam, make that a priority. I think probably the most common one out there is probably Veuve Clicquot, and it may be a little bit on the sweeter side than the ones that the examiners tend to use, the Louis Roederer and the Paul Roger demi-secs. So if you can find those, definitely go for those. But they're less sweet than what you expect. You hear the word sweet champagne, and you're expecting it like a dessert wine.
Sure.
And a lot of these aren't dessert wines. And so you really just need to try that just for your own focus on it. Yep. Looking at the wines there, I can really see people calling it like going like sparkling Vouvray. Thinking like it's one of the ones that like a Mousseux, that little bit of sweetness to it.
Yeah.
That could definitely be a very common lateral. And especially because if it's not sweet, it's just a little bit. So you might even think it's like an extra, even an extra dry.
Yeah. I had, what was it? It was Moet's Nectar Imperial, which is pretty sweet. And it was pleasant. I just assumed that I would really not enjoy, a sweeter style champagne. So I think they even make them in the small bottles if you don't want to commit to the big one, but it's definitely, it's a good one to work into your tasting lineup so you're ready for it. Okay, so we've done the Moscato d'Asti, the demi-sec champagne, and then the Prosecco Superiore extra dry. Have we confirmed that this is bottle fermented? Do we know? Do we suspect?
All the notes seem to indicate that it is tank fermented, but yet there are notes that describe kind of a creamy biscuitiness to it. So you can tank ferment something and keep it on its lees and do batonnage essentially in the tank. So this is one we've been trying to do a little digging on, and it kind of, from the notes that I'm reading from professional reviewers of the wine, so not people that are doing it, exam conditions, I kind of suspect that it was tank fermented, but on the lees and a little batonnage going on, which surprising, but it is a wine that the examiners have featured previously. Drawn a blank on the year. I think I sent you the year that was last on.
I don't have that either. Sorry.
I can look at it. I want to say like 2017, 2018. Okay. It wasn't too long ago.
I think if we both said 2017, then that's good. I mean, if you're getting creamy butter and toasted notes or toasted nuts notes on a Prosecco, there's definitely something different going on there. And unfortunately, again, if you did it 1, 2, 3, your palate might have been a bit shot by then. So the fact that maybe you didn't get those hints of autolytic notes or yeasty notes, think about what you did say about the wine. Did you describe the color even? There's a lot of marks there that can be gained even if you did not call this exactly correct. So something that you brought up that I thought was very interesting and spot on was if you are taking the exam and you kind of knew that it was a Moscato d'Asti, you might have talked yourself out of, well, they're not going to put 2 Italian sparklers on an exam. This has to be Cremant or something else. So no head games.
Yes. That's your worst enemy. It's trying to guess what the examiners are doing. Don't. Just go with the glass.
What is in the glass? Is it another Moscato d'Asti? Put that. I mean, they can do that. They can do whatever the heck they want. They are making these exams. So hopefully you did not get inside your head too much and discard Prosecco as an option because you'd already had an Italian wine. But this was extra dry, 12.5 grams per liter. You're starting out with 130 and then you're gradually decreasing. I think this flight would have been a challenge if you'd gone in order. So totally empathize with students who did that. But I do think that even if you didn't get those sweetness levels, you probably still did describe okay. Again, you've got your quality assessment, you've got your suitability for bottle aging. all those things, if you get a couple points here and there, they add up. So, yeah, I think that's a tricky Prosecco.
Mm-hmm.
So I had one, it was a very basic one, and very, I can say it was easy because I took it and I was like, oh, this is obviously Prosecco. This one would not be as obvious to me. So, yeah.
I mean, I will say one thing, looking back at the examiner's reports, D4 sparkling has some of the highest pass rates of all the units with that.
That is good to know.
Because there's so many overlapping notes on them.
Okay.
I mean, even if you went like, Cremant with the, for the champagne, overlapping notes. Even if you thought the Moscato Asti was a Prosecco, a lot of overlapping notes. So a lot of folks, even if they didn't nail the wines, probably racked up tons of marks.
Yeah. Did you say apple? Did you say pear?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope, and please, Amber and I are always available via DM, or, if you are on that ledge, not literally, hopefully, but, you just, we're not that kind of coaches. But let us know if, we can help kind of alleviate some of your concerns. But I think that the people I've spoken with in person, even though they may be zigged instead of zagged, I think that they still are going to be totally fine because of their descriptors and quality and all that other good stuff. So another note before we move on to D5 is, what I like to do is when I get my exam, I look at all the pages.
Oh, yeah.
Even the back. Look at the back, because sometimes something shows up there. And I had a question one time about comparing wine 2 and 3. And I thought, well, there's got to be something obvious about wines 2 and 3 that I need to pay particular attention to. So it's just kind of good to know what's coming down the pipeline. So review the questions first and then start your tasting. And we have somebody that just chimed in that took the exam and says it was a mind game.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, hindsight, it's easy to say, oh, I shouldn't have tasted them in order. But what's interesting is when we went back and looked at some of the past exams that did have an Asti, it has been at the end. I noticed that. So that's kind of a stinker.
Yeah.
Okay. D5.
All right. Let's get into Fortified. Let's get into hard stuff now. All right. So the wines that they released from the D5 Fortified exam was wine number 1, Campbell's Rutherglen Classic. So Rutherglen Muscat, which my last geeky mystery grape before that was that. So
you did.
Hopefully that may have helped some folks. We'll see with that. I was actually really surprised, kind of going back, with how often Rutherglen Muscat pops up, which I'll talk about. Wine number 2 was Quinta de Bom, and I'm going to butcher Portuguese, apologize, Rentero 20-year tawny, which is actually just Ramos Pinto 20-year tawny. So you're going to see the Ramos Pinto label. They like to do sub names for their different, like 20-year, 10 years with that, but just Ramos Pinto 20-year tawny. And then Barbadillo Cuco Oloroso 12-year. So that's a dry sherry Oloroso. So this is another one where, again, the order, the sweetest wine, classic Rutherglen Muscat, like 180 to 240 or so grams per liter. So if you tasted that first, then you went to a port, it's going to have a little bit of sweetness, and then a dry Oloroso at the end, that may have played some games with your palate.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So looking at the examiner's reports, with Rutherglen Muscat, a lot of times they commented on how often people named it as PX, like a sweeter sherry. So a lot of those overlapping notes there that you could have, even though if you didn't nail Rutherglen Muscat. A few things, like if you wanted to kind of parse it out, you'd be thinking a little bit more about the acid call. PX sherries in general are going to be a little bit more lower acid, while Rutherglen Muscat's a little bit higher acid on that, medium plus. But still, a lot of overlapping notes. From the mystery grape game, the most common laterals I had was PX. PX was number 1 by far. And then I had some Madeiras, Bull and Malmsey Madeira, and which makes perfect sense because I think of Rutherglen Muscat as if, PX sherry and Madeira had a baby. So even if you went Madeira for that first wine, you probably got a lot of marks with those overlapping notes.
PX, so PX would also hopefully be a little bit darker, but there would be, again, a lot of those overlapping, and you're starting with something that's 200 plus grams of sugar. So
Yeah.
that does narrow it down.
Yeah.
Could tawny port maybe get mixed up in there? There's a lot of the aromas and flavors, not the degree of sweetness, but I thought that could be a
Potentially,
possible.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the big thing with tawny port is tawny port red grapes, tannins.
Yeah.
So you are expecting tannins in them that you wouldn't expect in a sherry or Rutherglen Muscat.
Yeah.
Potentially, you could also go to like a Vin de Natural with that, But again, if you're thinking Grenache base, tannins on it.
Yeah. And just as a note, Amber and I both had the Rutherglen Muscat on our exam.
Yeah. This Campbell's particular one, showed up in this one. Also showed up January 2020 with that. That was our exam that Noelle and I did. November 2018, March 2016. So classic Rutherglen Muscat. And they've also done Stanton and Keeleen, another really good producer. So it's a wine like that demi-sec champagne, a lot of people taste. So if you are studying for these exams in the future, try to get your hands on one of those.
Yeah.
With that. Actually, let me just read real quick the tasting note that James Halliday did for this particular one. So some folks can kind of think, maybe did I get some of these notes here? Obviously, this is not written in an SAT style, but for this Campbell Classic Rutherglen, comes off a Solera aging method. The base of this is from the 1960s. And it's showing complexity and freshness in equal measures. So that acid, that freshness, medium plus acid. Luscious, light on its feet, yet offering plenty of lemon fruit cake flavors, toffee, salty Dutch licorice, so a little spice on it. So a lot of good notes there on it. Probably the key to nailing this is the Muscat character. Yeah. As I mentioned in my recap for the mystery grape, which folks can find that on our Elevage page, you see a picture of all these different Rutherglen Muscats. The most remarkable thing about Rutherglen Muscat is the Muscat character still comes out, even when you get to the more longer age styles on it. And that's impressive. And big reason why, I don't know if they asked a theory question on this exam with that Beyond the Wines, but if there's something about the production method, is it's fortified early, like 1% to 2%, because they want to maintain that Muscat character. And it's fortified with a very neutral spirit, that 96%. That's a big contrast to port, which is 77%, and usually fortified roughly kind of midway through 7-8% on that. Port smells porty. It smells very spirity because it is a less neutral spirit, and there's a heck of a lot more in it.
Yeah, and you should feel that warming sensation.
Yeah.
When you swallow. With the Rutherglen's a little bit less, alcohol, but not a ton.
Yeah.
I remember I backed into it because I was like, okay, this isn't this and this isn't that. That's how I went about doing it when we had it on our exam, was kind of eliminating the other options. Yeah. So that's one way to do it too.
Yeah. I mean, that would have been the medium alcohol. The port would have been high. Just remember Fortified. Actually, let me read off Fortified's alcohol levels are different for still wines. Low alcohol, 15 to 16.4%. So that would be like your Fino sherries. Medium, which Rutherglen would fall into, 16.5 to 18.4%. And then anything over 18.5 is high. So that is most of your ports. I don't think I've ever seen a port less than 18.5. The third wine in this flight, an aged Oloroso sherry, that's also going to be in the high range, because you've got to think about that long time aging. It, evaporation of the water, higher bumps up the alcohol on it.
Yep. Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
With the port, let me just read the reviews for the 20-year Ramos. This is a wine that, in general, tawny ports tend to get a lot of people nail them, and so they tend to get good marks. That's what we noticed in the past examiners report. But this just sounds like a delicious wine. From a single estate where a quarter of the vines are more than 80 years old, soft and seamless, boasting waves of dates, dried figs, Brazil nuts, toasted almonds. With that, this is from Decanter, Richard Mason's review of this wine. Actually, this actually reminds me. Another thing I noticed in the examiner's reports is a lot of people put just nuts in a review. Oh. There's lots of different types of nuts.
Yep.
So for those that have yet to take the exam, bump up your nut vocabulary.
Yep.
Hazelnuts, almonds, all the good stuff.
Pine nuts, corn nuts.
Yep.
No,
actually, that's one of the things I did before my Fortified exam. Is actually I bought several different types of nuts because they stay. And as I was tasting wine, just kind of taste them, just so I can start kind of familiarizing myself. Because I have you have nuts and trail mix and stuff, and you don't really think about it. But I wanted to actually like think about it. Okay, this is what an almond tasted like versus a hazelnut versus a walnut.
I think that's great. And smell your dish of nuts, and then smell your Are you getting the floor almond, or are you getting walnuts in your Oloroso? That's a great exercise. Yeah.
So the Oloroso was the last one. The Cuckoo Oloroso, 12 years. One of the best sites for sherry. So if you want to learn anything about sherry, in my opinion, Ruben's site, Sherry Notes, sherrynotes.com, bookmark it. It's phenomenal. He did a review on this wine here. His review 2017, so obviously it was a different batch, but a lot of things with sherry, they go for that consistency of style. So I think his review is pretty stellar with that. A couple things he noted about this, because this sounds like a delicious. I think the wines for the folks that took this exam got really lucky with the wines. They got some really good stuff, sounds like. So this is actually aged from different bodegas. They pull different bodegas into the Solera. 13 Crideras, which is a higher number than usual for Olorosos. And this particular Solera actually feeds into one of their higher end VORS Olorosos. So again, really good stuff there. So Ruben described this wine as very fragrant and intense, so pronounced intensity, with lots of polished wood and dried fruits, almonds and walnuts, so different types of nuts there. Orange peel, also hints of dates and fig, toffee and mocha, blood orange, even with nuances of black cherries on it. So again, sounds delicious.
They really do. They sound. I would never want to take that exam again, but those sound like good wines to have in your lineup. What would be a lateral for an Oloroso, do you think?
So I can actually see some people. I mean, if you miss the acid call with it being lower acid, you could go thinking tawny. You look at the color; it is kind of that tawny color, and you could be thinking it's port with that. Yeah. Now, you would expect port to be sweeter, but in the midst of an exam, sometimes you just kind of freak out. Yeah. But honestly, I think this was probably a fairly safe one for a lot of folks. But they may have went like a different type of sherry. They may have went like Amontillado or Palo Cortado, which is fine because you're going to get a lot of those marks.
Totally. Yeah. And again, it's weighted between your tasting and your theory. And I believe you only have to get 45% on one of the halves. You have to get 55% total to pass, but you don't have to get a minimum of 55 on each half. I'm pretty darn sure about that. But yeah, if you just think that you tanked a couple of these, we can confirm that. And we'll discuss it tomorrow on our D3 review. But I do remember that from past examiners' things, is if you needed to get at least a 45% balanced with like a 65%. So I mean, I think these were fair wines. Obviously I didn't take it, but the Rutherglen, it shows up a lot, and I can't say I drank a lot of it other than maybe tasting it once in class. So
that probably was the most challenging. But if you racked up tons of marks with the port and with the sherry, and even if you didn't nail the Rutherford, if you went Madeira, if you went PX, you probably still, again, racked up quite a few marks. It's just all in how you did your note.
Yeah. So hopefully that helped some of you guys, either now or in the future, if you've got these exams coming up. Some of these wines rear their heads a lot.
Yes.
And just because they just showed up on this exam doesn't mean that they won't show up in January. So don't write these wines off and say, well, they had a Moscato d'Asti just this last October. There is no way they'll have it in January.
Yeah.
Not the case.
Yeah. Many times looking at past wines, the very next exam may be a different producer, but some similar wines often pop up. So nobody knows but the examiners.
Yeah.
Again, somebody's trying to tell you that they can guess what the wine is, look at the data, crunch numbers. No. Don't fall into those head games.
It's easy, and we did it, I think, a little bit when we were students, but yeah, it's a waste of time. So as always, ask us any questions. If you took the exam, reach out and just let us know how you're feeling. I've talked to a few of you, Amber's talked to a few of you, and we're here to support you going forward and keep us posted on how things are going, and just try to put it out of your mind. I know it's a long, was it 10 weeks or 12 weeks?
Yeah. So January or so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of you are already jumping into your next unit. So you'll get going with that, and you'll almost forget that you have this exam result to come out. So yeah.
So tomorrow we will talk about the D3 wines. It's going to be a different time because, Noelle, we want her to have fun on her vacation, not just work all the time. So, so tomorrow, 2 p.m. Here in London, which would be 10 a.m. in New York. So a little early on the West Coast.
For Pacific.
But you can watch the replay.
You can watch the replay. Yeah. If anybody has any questions before we go live tomorrow, let us know. But otherwise, hope to see most of you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Take care. Bye.